9 experienced hikers, a mountain they had climbed before, and a night so terrifying that whatever found them in the dark, they tore their own tent open from the inside to escape it. They ran, barefoot, into -30 degrees, into the trees, into the dark, and not a single one of them made it back. The Soviet government sealed the files. The investigators closed the case with a single sentence that the hikers perished due to a compelling unknown force. They never explained what that force was. 6 decades later, neither can we. January 1959, the city of Sverdlovsk, Soviet Union. A group of 10 students and graduates from the Ural Polytechnical Institute pack their bags for a Category 3 ski trek, the most difficult classification possible. Their destination, Ural Mountain, deep in the northern Urals. The name Ural, in the language of the indigenous Mansi people, translates loosely to "don't go there." They went anyway. The group's leader was Igor Dyatlov, 23 years old, a skilled engineer and experienced winter hiker who had led expeditions before. The others were his friends, his classmates, people who trusted him completely. They were young, they were trained, and they were excited. One of them kept a diary, another had a camera. They photographed everything: the laughing faces at the train station, the snow-dusted trees, the grey Soviet sky. These photographs would later become some of the most studied and most haunting images in the history of unsolved mysteries. By February 1st, the group had been hiking for days. They were behind schedule. The weather was worsening. A decision was made to push through and make camp on the exposed slope of Holatsyakl, another Mansi name. This one means dead mountain. They pitched their tent on the slope rather than in the sheltered valley below. Investigators later speculated this was to save time in the morning. They ate dinner. They wrote in their diaries. One of the group's journals included a joking entry that night, a mock newspaper headline teasing their journey. It was light-hearted, happy even. Then night fell, and something happened. Whatever it was, it happened fast enough that 9 people abandoned their tent in the dark, tore through its fabric wall, and scattered into -30-degree air, wearing almost nothing. Some were in socks, some were barefoot entirely. The snow was ankle-deep, and the wind was tearing across the open slope. They had left behind their boots, their coats, their food, their axes, everything that could save a human life in those conditions. They left it behind. The hikers died as the result of an overwhelming natural force. The case is closed. Search parties found the tent on February 26, 1959, nearly 4 weeks after the group went silent. It was partially buried in snow. The entrance was still zipped shut from the outside, but the side wall had been slashed and torn open from the inside. Investigators found a trail of footprints leading away from the tent, down toward the tree line. Not running footprints, walking ones, as if whoever left the tent did so calmly, deliberately, in some kind of controlled group movement. About a mile down the slope, they found the first 2 bodies, Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko. They were found beneath a large cedar tree, barefoot, in their underwear. The branches of the cedar had been broken off as high as 5 meters up, as if someone had desperately climbed the tree, perhaps to look for something or to escape something below them. A small fire had been built nearby and had burned out. Around the fire there was evidence of a struggle, broken branches, disturbed snow. The cedar tree itself had deep scratches in the bark. not from tools, from fingernails. More bodies were discovered over the following weeks and months. 3 were found on the slope between the tent and the tree line. 2 were found near the cedar tree. And then in May, months later, when the snow finally began to melt, 4 more bodies were discovered in a ravine about 70 meters from the cedar tree, buried under nearly 4 meters of snow. These 4 had clearly survived the longest. They had improvised, cut clothing from the other dead bodies to cover themselves, built some kind of den. They had fought to live. But it was what the medical examiners found that changed this from a tragic accident into something that could not be explained. Lyudmila Dubinina had no tongue, no eyes, no lips. The soft tissue of her face had been removed. The medical examiner noted that the hemorrhaging around the wounds suggested this happened while she was still alive. Semyon Zolotarev had the same damage to his eyes and soft facial tissue. And then there were the broken bones. 3 of the hikers had massive internal injuries, fractured ribs, crushed chest cavities, fractured skulls. But no external wounds, no cuts, no bruising on the skin. Whatever force had shattered their bones had done so without touching the outside of their bodies. The forensic expert who examined them said the force required was comparable to a car crash. I have never, in my entire career, seen injuries like these on a person who was still walking around. The force that caused this should have killed them instantly, but they moved after it happened. And then there was the radiation. When investigators finally examined the clothing of the hikers in the ravine, they found measurable levels of radioactive contamination, beta radiation. 2 items in particular registered high levels: Krivonishenko's trouser leg and a section of Dubinina's sweater. The Soviet government had no explanation, or if they did, they never shared it. The case files were sealed, restricted, locked away in Soviet archives for over 3 decades. The lead investigator, Lev Ivanov, would later admit in a 1990 interview, given only after the Soviet Union had begun to collapse, that he had been pressured to close the case quickly, that certain evidence had been suppressed, that he personally believed the incident involved something he could not name. He died in 1997 without ever saying exactly what that something was. Six decades of investigation, dozens of competing theories, some rational, some terrifying. The avalanche theory is the most commonly cited official explanation. A sudden snow slab could have shifted in the night, crushing the tent, causing the hikers to cut their way out and flee. Some researchers argue this accounts for the internal injuries, the compression of a snow slab pressing down with hundreds of kilograms of force. But there are problems. The slope was not steep enough to generate a standard avalanche. There was no evidence of a snow fracture line anywhere near the tent, and experienced investigators who visited the site in the weeks after said the surrounding snow was undisturbed. In 2019, the Russian government officially reopened the case. In 2021, they announced their conclusion: a small, rare katabatic avalanche, a sudden wind-driven snow event, was responsible. Case closed. Again. Most researchers rejected this conclusion immediately. The avalanche theory, they argued, still cannot explain the radiation, cannot explain the missing soft tissue, cannot explain why the hikers walked calmly away from the tent in orderly footprints instead of scrambling in panic. The infrasound theory is one of the most compelling. Infrasound, sound below the range of human hearing, is known to cause extreme psychological distress when produced at specific frequencies. Symptoms include panic, irrational fear, feelings of a presence nearby, visual disturbances, disorientation, and in severe cases, organ damage. Certain mountain formations under specific wind conditions can act as natural infrasound generators. If Kholat-Syakhl produced an infrasound event that night, it would explain the apparent panic, 9 experienced hikers abandoning shelter in a way that defies all their training. It would not explain the radiation. It would not explain the missing soft tissue. The military weapons theory proposes that Soviet military testing in the area, known to have occurred in the Urals during this period, resulted in an accidental exposure event. Parachute mines, which detonate above ground and create exactly the type of internal blast wave injuries found on the hikers, were tested in this region. The Mansi people, indigenous to the area, reported seeing strange glowing orbs in the sky over the mountains during this period. The Soviet military confirmed nothing, as always. When the Soviet archives were partially declassified in the 1990s, researchers expected answers. What they found instead were more questions. Pages were missing. Evidence logs referenced items that were never catalogued. A photograph, one of the last frames recovered from the hikers' own cameras, shows a blurry, bright streak of light against a dark sky. Taken at night from the tent, the timestamp places it in the final hours before whatever happened. What was in that sky? Investigators noted that some of the hikers' clothing had turned an unusual orange-brown color, not a shade consistent with bloodstaining, exposure, or decomposition at the rate observed. The tanning of the skin on the bodies recovered also progressed abnormally, in ways that the lead forensic examiner documented but declined to explain in the official record. One detail above all others haunts researchers who have spent years on this case. Yuri Krivonishenko, one of the first 2 found dead beneath the cedar tree, was found to have a piece of skin and flesh in his mouth, not swallowed, held in his teeth, bitten off from his own hand. Whatever those hikers experienced in their final hours, whatever they saw or felt or heard on that slope, it reached a level of terror that the human mind simply cannot produce under rational circumstances. They were afraid of something. Not the cold, not the snow. Something made them stop being rational humans. I have never seen that look on a face that died from cold. The Dyatlov Pass has been visited by thousands of researchers, journalists, explorers, and hikers in the decades since. Some report nothing unusual. Others describe an unexplainable unease that settles over them as they approach the slope, a heaviness in the chest, a certainty of being watched, a sudden and overwhelming desire to turn back. The mountain has a way of holding its silence. The pass was officially renamed in honor of the group who died there. Igor Dyatlov's name on a map of the place that killed him and his friends. The local Mansi elders, when asked what they believe happened, give the same answer they have always given. They have known about that mountain for generations. They do not go there. They have always called it Dead Mountain. And when outsiders ask why, they simply say, some places belong to forces that do not want to be seen. And if you see them anyway, you do not come back to tell anyone what you found. The official files are now partially open. Researchers have spent 65 years on this single event, and yet nothing fully explains it. Not the avalanche, not the infrasound, not the military weapons. Nothing accounts for all of it. The calm, orderly footprints, the shattered bones with unbroken skin, the radiation, the missing flesh, the photographs, the sealed testimony, the investigator who died with a secret on his lips. Here is what we know with certainty. 9 real people, experienced and trained and unafraid of winter mountains, encountered something on that slope that drove them to a choice between staying in the tent and dying or running into the dark with no shoes in -30 degrees. They chose to run. All 9 of them made the same choice. That means whatever was in that tent with them, or whatever was outside pressing in, was worse than certain death by exposure. Think about that. Really think about that. The next time you are somewhere familiar and quiet, and you feel that sudden cold certainty that something is wrong, your body knows things your rational mind refuses to accept. 9 hikers on a mountain in 1959 felt exactly that feeling, and they ran, and they never stopped running, and neither, perhaps, should you.